A woman stood up in the third row of the Dr. Phil studio and said two words that would stop everything. "Is that?" Her hand flew to her mouth. The cameras kept rolling, but every person in that room, producers, crew, audience, Dr. Phil himself, turned to look at her. Because what happened next wasn't in the script. It wasn't planned. And it would become one of the most unforgettable moments in the show's history. Dr. Phil McGraw has spent decades on television. He's seen confessions, confrontations, breakthroughs, and breakdowns. But this was different. This was a moment where the show stopped being a show and became something else entirely. A moment where the past collided with the present in front of millions of viewers. And it all started with a guest who came on the show looking for help with something completely unrelated. The episode was supposed to be about financial recovery. The guest, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, had written to the show about being in debt after a series of bad decisions and family obligations that had drained her savings. She was drowning, she said, and didn't know where to turn. The producers thought it would be a straightforward episode: assess the damage, bring in a financial expert, create a plan. Standard procedure. But the moment Sarah walked onto that stage, something shifted in the room. Not because of what she said. Because of who saw her. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah sat down in the chair across from Dr. Phil, visibly nervous. She was in her late 40s, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hands fidgeting with a tissue. Dr. Phil, as always, was direct but kind. "Sarah, tell me what's going on. What brought you here today?" She began to explain. Medical bills from her mother's illness. A car accident that insurance didn't fully cover. Credit card debt that spiraled out of control. Dr. Phil listened, nodding, asking clarifying questions. The audience was attentive but calm. This was familiar territory. Then, from the third row, a voice cut through the air. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just stunned. "Oh my God!" Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. His head turned toward the audience. "I'm sorry, did someone?" A woman stood up. Her name was Rebecca Torres, though no one knew that yet. She was shaking, one hand gripping the seat in front of her for balance, the other covering her mouth. Her eyes were locked on Sarah. "Is that Sarah? Sarah Mitchell?" The studio went completely silent. Sarah's head snapped toward the voice. Her face strained of color. For 3 full seconds she just stared. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Becca?" Dr. Phil stood up. He didn't say anything. He just watched. Because even he could sense that something profound was happening. Rebecca's voice cracked. "I thought you were dead." The room felt like it had been emptied of oxygen. No one moved. No one breathed. Sarah stood up from her chair, her legs unsteady. I thought you didn't want to find me." Dr. Phil stepped back from the stage, his hand signaling to the production crew. "Hold the cameras. Keep rolling, but hold everything else." He looked at Sarah, then at Rebecca. "Do you two know each other?" Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We were best friends. When we were kids. We lived on the same street. We did everything together. And then," her voice broke. "Then one day, she was just gone. Her whole family disappeared. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Nothing." Sarah's hands were shaking. "My dad, he got in trouble. Legal trouble. We had to leave in the middle of the night. I didn't even get to pack my things. I wasn't allowed to contact anyone. I was 8 years old, Becca. I didn't have a choice." Dr. Phil walked slowly toward Rebecca. "How long has it been?" 32 years, Rebecca whispered. "I've thought about her almost every day. I tried to find her online, but I didn't even know if she kept her last name. And now she's just here. On the stage." Dr. Phil turned to his producers off camera. "Bring her down here. Get her a chair." Rebecca walked down the aisle, her steps hesitant, like she was afraid Sarah might vanish again. When she reached the stage, the two women just stood there, staring at each other. And then, as if 32 years hadn't passed at all, they fell into each other's arms. The audience erupted. Not with applause, not yet, but with the kind of collective gasp that only happens when people witness something real. Something raw. Dr. Phil let them hold each other. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just let it happen. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is get out of the way. When they finally pulled apart, both women were sobbing. Dr. Phil handed them tissues and gestured for Rebecca to sit in the chair next to Sarah. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's talk about this." Rebecca looked at Sarah. "I thought something terrible had happened to you. I used to have nightmares about it. I told myself that maybe you moved away and just forgot about me, but deep down, I was terrified that something bad had happened." Sarah shook her head. "I never forgot you. Not for one day. I used to write you letters that I couldn't send. I still have them. In a box. At home." Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Sarah, why didn't you try to reach out when you got older?" Sarah's face crumpled. "Because I was ashamed. My dad went to prison. My mom struggled with addiction. I didn't want Becca to see what my life had become. I didn't want her to think I turned into this." Rebecca reached over and grabbed Sarah's hand. "You think I would have cared about any of that? You were my best friend. You were my person." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He stood up and walked behind his desk, pulling out a small card. He walked back to the two women and placed it on the table between them. "This," he said, "is not something we planned. This is not something anyone could have scripted. But I've been doing this a long time, and I know when something needs to be honored." He looked at the audience. "We talk a lot on this show about accountability, about change, about doing the hard work. But sometimes healing doesn't come from a plan. It comes from a moment. A moment like this." He turned back to Sarah and Rebecca. "Sarah, you came here today because you're drowning financially. But I think there's something deeper going on. I think you've been carrying a weight that has nothing to do with money." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "And Rebecca," Dr. Phil continued, "you've been carrying grief for a friend you thought you'd lost forever. Both of you have been living with an open wound for 3 decades. He gestured to the photograph that was now displayed on the screen behind them, a picture one of the producers had pulled from Sarah's social media during the break. It showed 2 little girls, no more than 7 or 8, standing in front of a swing set, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. "That's you too, isn't it?" Both women looked at the screen and broke down again. Dr. Phil let the moment sit. Then he said, "I'm going to do something I don't usually do. We're going to pause this taping. Sarah, Rebecca, you two need time. Real time. Not television time. So we're going to take you backstage, give you a private room, and let you talk. No cameras. No audience. Just the two of you." The audience started clapping. Not the polite, procedural applause you hear on talk shows. This was different. This was people recognizing that they were witnessing something sacred. Dr. Phil looked directly into the camera. "We'll be right back. But before we go," he turned to the audience. "If you've ever lost someone and wondered if they still think about you, if you've ever felt like you disappeared from someone's life and didn't know how to come back, remember this moment. Because connection doesn't die. It just waits. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." The cameras cut. The studio lights dimmed slightly. Sarah and Rebecca were escorted backstage, still holding hands, still crying, still processing the impossibility of what had just happened. Behind the scenes, the production team was in chaos. Not bad chaos, just the kind of beautiful, unscripted chaos that happens when real life breaks through the television format. Producers were on the phone with therapists. Dr. Phil's team was rearranging the rest of the taping schedule. Someone was already working on a follow-up segment. But in that private room backstage, none of that mattered. Sarah and Rebecca sat across from each other, 2 women who had once been inseparable, now trying to make sense of lost time. Rebecca spoke first. I need you to know something. I never stopped being your friend. Even when I didn't know where you were, even when I thought I'd never see you again, you were still my friend. Sarah wiped her eyes. I used to imagine what it would be like if I saw you again. I rehearsed what I'd say. But now that you're here, I don't have words. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I disappeared. You were a kid, Rebecca said. You didn't have a choice. But we have a choice now. Dr. Phil knocked on the door before entering. He didn't sit down. He just stood near the doorway, giving them space but offering guidance. I want to ask you both something. What do you want to happen next? Sarah looked at Rebecca. I don't want to lose you again. Rebecca nodded. Then you won't. We'll figure it out. Whatever it takes. Dr. Phil smiled, not the television smile, but the real one. Good. Because I'm going to make sure you have the support to do that. Therapy if you want it. Resources for staying connected. Whatever you need. He pulled out a card and handed it to Sarah. This is a contact for a financial planner who works with people in situations like yours. But here's the thing, Sarah, money problems can be solved. What you're dealing with goes deeper than that. And I think having Becca back in your life is going to be part of your healing. He turned to Rebecca. And you've been carrying the weight of not knowing. That weight is lifted now. But grief doesn't just vanish. You're going to need to process this, too. Both women nodded. Dr. Phil looked at them for a long moment. Then he said, You know, I've been doing this show for over 20 years. I've seen thousands of people walk through those doors. But every once in a while, something happens that reminds me why I do this work. Today was one of those days. He opened the door. Take your time. When you're ready, we'll bring you back out. The audience wants to see that you're okay. When Sarah and Rebecca returned to the stage, the audience rose to their feet before Dr. Phil even said a word. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't about the show. It wasn't about entertainment. It was about bearing witness to something real. Dr. Phil waited for the applause to die down. Then he said, Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when we show up. When we're vulnerable. When we let people see us. Sarah came here today asking for help with her finances. What she got was something far more valuable. He turned to the two women. Before we wrap this up, I want to ask you both one more question. What's the first thing you're going to do together when you leave here? Sarah laughed through her tears. I don't know. Maybe just sit somewhere and talk? Rebecca smiled. I have 32 years of stories to catch up on. Dr. Phil nodded. Then that's what you'll do. And I want you to know, both of you, that this moment didn't happen by accident. You were meant to find each other again. Maybe not in this exact way, but you were meant to come back together. He looked at the audience. Life doesn't give us many second chances. When it does, we have to take them. The camera focused on the photograph again, the two little girls on the swing set. Then it cut to Sarah and Rebecca, sitting side by side, hands still intertwined, smiling through tears. Dr. Phil's final words echoed through the studio. Connection doesn't die. It just waits. And sometimes, it waits until the exact right moment to come back to life. The episode ended there. But the story didn't. Because in the weeks that followed, Sarah and Rebecca rebuilt their friendship. They met for coffee. They talked on the phone. They introduced their families to each other. And slowly, piece by piece, they filled in the gaps that 32 years had left behind. Dr. Phil followed up with them 3 months later in a special segment. Both women appeared together, healthier, happier, and visibly transformed. Sarah's financial situation was improving. She had a plan now, and more importantly, she had support. Rebecca had begun therapy to process the grief she'd been carrying. But the biggest change was simple. They had each other again. Dr. Phil asked them what the most important lesson from their story was. Sarah answered first. That it's never too late. I thought I'd burned that bridge. I thought there was no going back. But I was wrong. Rebecca added, and that some connections are stronger than time. Stronger than distance. Stronger than anything. Dr. Phil nodded. That's exactly right. And I hope everyone watching remembers that. The photograph, the one of the two little girls, became a symbol. Not just for Sarah and Rebecca, but for everyone who had ever lost someone and wondered if they still mattered to them. Because sometimes, the people we lose aren't gone. They're just waiting for the right moment to come back into our lives. And when that moment comes, all we have to do is say yes. Dr. Phil ended the follow-up with one final thought. If there's someone you've been thinking about, someone you lost touch with, don't wait another 32 years. Reach out. Today. Because connection doesn't die. It just waits for you to remember it's still there. The studio lights faded. But the story lived on.